Hello everybody, my name is Jeremy and you're watching the Morgue, which brings me one step closer to my plans for total world domination. The bulk of today's episode is going to be a first look at Funcom's upcoming horror/conspiracy MMO, The Secret World. Despite not having the hands-on demo that a lot of us wanted to see at PAX, they did take that weekend to share a whole slew of information with fans of The Secret World, and quite a few of these include some innovations that I think are interesting enough that I'm going to spend some time looking over them with you. In addition to that, in this episode, I also have some news about DC Universe Online and updates regarding the free-to-play conversions of City of Heroes and Fallen Earth. But before we get into any of that, I have some bad news to share with you guys. Well, potential bad news regarding Star Wars: The Old Republic. I don't want to sound like I'm ringing too many bells here, alarms and whistles and everything. This is not something that's really all that big of a deal, but it's newsworthy. I figured it's worth talking about, and that is, if you've been watching the beta process for Star Wars, you know that just recently BioWare decided to cancel at least one of their beta test weekends that were scheduled for this month of September. And this was done as a response to their first beta test weekend where apparently things went a little south. I don't have any solid details on what exactly went down, but it looks like basically the server tech just wasn't quite up to snuff to support another testing weekend. There were a couple other things that were considerations for that, but what it boils down to is that they just weren't ready to have more people flood their servers. So they came out publicly and told us, no more testing for a little while, we'll get back to you soon. I'm really on the fence about this news for a couple reasons. One is that I think delays are actually always a good thing in this industry. Ultimately, they work out to that in the end, and BioWare is actually spinning it this way. I buy it. I mean, if you don't launch a game when it's not ready, it's always a good thing. So the delay is always better than a bad launch. That's a plus. On the other hand, this just goes to prove, or at least support, my theory that I talked about several episodes ago, that I just don't feel like BioWare is ready to be hosting a top-shelf MMO yet. And seeing delays like this happen, they kind of reinforce that gut feeling of mine. It makes me worried. But again, I'm not getting all up in arms about it. It's not that big of a deal. And on its own, actually might not even be worth talking about. But at the same time that this note about the beta delays came out, a representative from EA was quoted in an investor meeting as saying that EA actually has financial contingency plans in place just in case the TOR launch doesn't actually happen until Q1 of 2012. Now, really, that's just smart financial planning, to be honest, but that combined with the beta delays, getting a little leery here. And as I mentioned before, the launch of TOR has gained up so much hype. This entire game has so much hype and so much attention drawn towards it from both within the MMO communities and without, that whether or not this game launches successfully or poorly is going to be a direct reflection on the MMO industry as a whole, and can go a long way towards either reinforcing or eliminating the notion that MMOs just don't ever launch when they're ready. So please, BioWare, get your act together, would you? All of us are counting on you. All right, enough bad news for this one. Let's get right into our first look at The Secret World. Now, despite The Secret World having a number of mechanics that I think are interesting enough that I'm going to spend an entire segment talking about this, I gotta be honest, just right up front here, that from the demos that I've seen, this game doesn't really look like something that's going to end up interesting me. But for a few major reasons, and I realize here is a little nitpicky, but it's just my initial impressions. The first of which is that this is supposed to be a secret world, right? Well, all the gameplay footage that I've seen shows teams of magic-wielding superheroes taking on hordes of zombies and 2 to 4 story tall Cthulhu-esque monsters, and that just doesn't seem very secret to me. But I think more important to that is the actual development process itself, which I've been following kind of tangentially since, well, for a long time now. And I keep hearing about different little delays and mixed messages coming out of Funcom regarding The Secret World. The biggest example that springs to mind right off the bat is that they've already announced a launch date for this game, despite not having entered into beta yet. That feels like really jumping the gun to a huge degree. And even though that launch window is 6 months off, I don't think a developer should feel comfortable enough with their product if they haven't even been into beta yet to make such an assertion. All right, but all of my personal nigglings aside, let's get into talking about the specific game mechanics because they are something worth being excited about and things that we have not seen in the MMO industry to date. The first of these is the concept of environmental interactions. You see, critters in this game, bad dudes, zombies, etc., will to some certain degree have an ability to interact with the environment Now, some of the examples that we've seen about this so far are like car alarms, attracting the attention of nearby zombies and actually spawning additional zombies, as well as light sources, if used in a dark enough environment, actually attracting the attention of enemies, which means you have to choose between using a flashlight or potentially laying down things like flares, stationary flares that could attract the enemy's attention away from you. Now, this particular mechanic can also be used in PvP, as we've already been told some of the maps will contain areas that are too dark to see well in, but you have to choose whether or not you want to use your light source, as other players will be able to see your lights. I'm curious to see just exactly how Funcom takes this concept of environmental interactions, but we've also seen that they use it in some of their boss encounters to do things like electrify water and such effects like that. Now, let's talk a little bit about PvP, because there are two separate mechanics to this that I'd like to speak with you a little bit about. Well, the first of these is just a cosmetic thing, but really innovative, not probably going to be well received by everybody, though. This is the fact that when you enter a PvP match, your outfit is actually going to be changed. You'll be assigned a role based on the powers that you have chosen. And I'll get into powers just a little bit later when I talk about the skill system, which is also quite innovative. So that means that if the power setup you're using is more akin to a healer, your outward appearance in that PvP match will resemble what a classical healer would look like, probably a cloth-wearing robe type of some sort. Conversely, if you're set up to use big two-handed weapons, you'll probably look like a big burly tank of some sort. Now, this helps both your enemies and your allies to very quickly choose their targets and choose who to support. You see, the skill system in this game is also going to offer a lot of synergies between different roles that you can take on in combat. So if you know that a certain ally looks like this, you know what to expect from them in terms of what powers they will use. And it'll be really easy to target the enemy's healers, which also means you'll know which healer to protect so that you can stay alive. Now, the other PvP mechanic that is actually not getting a lot of play from Funcom, publicity-wise, is the whole concept of this being a three-faction game. Now, up to this point, as far as I'm aware, the only previous MMO that's offered three-faction gameplay with a PvP-centric focus was Dark Age of Camelot, which many out there still believe is one of the best PvP experiences available in the MMO arena. And one of the reasons for that is basic social-driven balance. If on any server within Dark Age of Camelot there ever became an imbalance between the factions so that one vastly outpowered the other two, that didn't last long because the remaining two were able to team up against them to take them down. So while when the factions were on an even plane, it was all just a free-for-all, it was very hard to become the big man on campus, simply because the other players don't like being stomped on all the time. Now, there's plenty going on with the three-faction gameplay that I can't really comment on until I actually see the Secret Worlds PvP mechanics in play, but suffice it to say, it's a unique aspect that we haven't seen in the MMO industry for quite some time. Now, let's talk about the skill system in the Secret World, because honestly, I think that anybody watching this game from a distance, this is the number one innovation that gets most people's attention, and there's a darn good reason for that. You see, within the Secret World, there does not exist levels. There are no classes. There are no race choices either. You're all humans. Instead, what you're offered is the ability to make your own builds based on a setup of skills that includes more than 500 different skills. And these are all each supposed to be individually unique, not just increase ranks of the previous skills that already existed. Now, when you first start the game, you'll have a basic set of these, but as you progress, you earn more and more skill points that can be used to unlock additional skills until you can get to the point where any one player can learn every single skill in the game. They can't use them all at the same time, though. That's the catch. You can only at one time ever equip 7 active skills and 7 passive skills. But you can change that skill setup at practically any time you want, when you're in a social zone or when you're near these specific little magic spots in the game. According to Funcom, the actual difficulty of this game is based on player skill and not the scaling of these abilities. In other words, the abilities that you start with at the beginning of the game are still completely viable when you get to the point where you've scaled them up quite some ways. And the scaling of the difficulty is instead based on the equipment that you're wearing because, like I said earlier, there are no levels. And the equipment that you put on your avatar will instead change the effectiveness of certain types of skills. Now, one of the primary points of concern that I have with this is the fact that 500 skills is going to be way overwhelming for new players. But they've already thought of this. They put in a number of templates that you can assign to yourself right off the bat, such as a monk class that's a combination of healing and hand-to-hand combat. It's not really technically a class. Nowhere on your character will it actually say monk, but they allow you to assign your skills based on these templates so that you don't have to create them all from scratch. Now, the other point of concern I have is actually community-based in the fact that once this game gets going a ways, there's bound to become some sort of, well, language that develops among the long-term players of the Secret World so that they can find each other for pickup groups and things like that. And new players are going to have no way of understanding this because there's no easy categories for them to follow to know what sort of character another player is, or at least is at that time. Now, this is something that's pretty much prevalent throughout the MMO industry, so it's probably not that big a deal, but it would be nice to have some sort of way to control it so that new players can have just as good of a social experience in this game long after it launches. Something to keep in mind. Now, the last big mechanic that I want to talk to you about in the Secret World is actually their missions. Not all of them, but many of their missions are going to include what's called commonly an ARG, alternate reality game, which includes tying in the in-game world with real-life events or real-life actions of some sort. In the Secret World, since it's set in the modern-day world, you will have every modern convenience at your fingertips to be able to solve puzzles that you'll find in the game, including the internet. Now, one of the examples that were given in the demos that were shown off earlier is a character comes across a locked crate inside a wrecked shipping barge, but they're able to use the internet to look up the shipping crate number that's printed on the side of that crate in the game to find the shipping manifest for the barge and the attached access codes to open that locked crate in the game. All of that information can be found on the internet and not in the game itself, causing players to have to actually immerse themselves in this game world even when they're not playing as their avatar. And it really helps nail home the reality of this situation. You're not playing in some mixed up fantasy world that just doesn't exist. In fact, when they combine this fact with the fact that you'll be visiting iconic locations like New York City, Seoul, London, Egypt, all these places that are actually known in the world, and using these ARGs to look up past references to occult dealings and the whole mythos surrounding the Secret World, it'll really draw you into feeling like this is a real living environment that you're actually a part of. Now, obviously, there's a bit of a downside to this, and that most of these puzzles will be solved within months of the game coming out, unless Funcom can find some way of rolling out a new suite of them, all brand new, on a pretty regular basis. I don't really foresee that happening, but even at its worst case scenario at that point, the player will still have to go to the internet to find the answer. It's just then it'll be handed to them instead of them having to do the research. And even at that point, I think it'll still help with the immersion. Now, in addition to these just everyday missions, there will also be large world-changing events that are driven by the story within the world of Secret World that will be competitive across all three factions. And whichever faction solve these particular puzzles first will receive some sort of faction-wide benefit, be it a boost to damage or a boost to regeneration or something like that. But it will affect every member of that faction if they're the ones that solved it first. Which again goes back to my commentary about three-faction PvP. It's very unlikely that one faction will always manage to outwit the other two. Now, one last thing that's not a mechanic-based thing, but that I want to talk to you about the Secret World is their subscription model. Funcom has come out and announced that they will be combining a monthly subscription with an in-game cash shop. When previous MMOs have decided to go this route, it has never gone over all that well. But Funcom is promising us nothing will appear on this cash shop that isn't just a cosmetic item or a convenience item. Yeah, well, we've been around the block a few times, haven't we? We've seen that same promise made in the past, and it never quite pans out. Well, if Funcom can stick to their guns on this, they've still got some barriers to overcome. Because even if the cash shop only contains convenience and cosmetic items, a portion of their subscription base will still be upset with the fact that the cash shop exists at all. I mean, why are they paying $15 a month if they can't have the entire game? And why should they have to shell out even more just to look unique? Now, the only choice that a developer has in this position to potentially quell those fears is to offer those same items available through some other means in-game. In fact, it's my opinion that doing so actually could potentially draw extra sales of that item on the cash shop. You see, it's kind of a weird mixed-up psychology that MMO players have, and the fact that they're not frequently enticed to buy just some thing that's available on a cash shop. But if that thing is time, you see, if you offer them an alternative means of obtaining that item within the game, and the player can actually see the amount of time that would have to be invested to obtain it, they are more likely to buy that item on a cash shop than if that item was not elsewise available. Now, let me take that example just one step further, just in case I haven't really nailed the point home. And this is just my opinion, of course, but I really feel strongly about this. Let's say Secret World puts up a black trench coat on the cash shop for 20 bucks. Well, you know, everybody in the secret world's going to want a black trench coat, right? Black trench coats are cool. But $20 is more than a monthly subscription cost. Why would you ever pay that much? So you also offer an alternative in-game, where it's also dropped from a boss that requires a 40-man raid. I don't even know if Secret World's going to require 40-man raids, but let's say that that's the case. So now players have an in-game option to get the black trench coat, or they can also spend 300 hours grinding up a specific faction so that they can request that item from an in-game merchant of some sort that's only available once they've gotten their faction up to a certain point. Well, players seeing that black trench coat on the cash shop for 20 bucks would just roll their eyes and laugh at Funcom at first, until they saw the means by which it would be necessary to get it in-game. And many players would be willing to go through those grinds to get that awesome item, but many would not. Many would sit back and say, well, I don't have 39 friends to take me on a raid, or I don't have 300 hours to spend on faction grinding. 20 bucks, give me the trench coat. And they otherwise might not have purchased it. There's also an additional side to this, in that if you don't offer that alternative way for people to get that black trench coat in-game, then other players that think $20 for an item like that is dumb will just laugh at anybody that does buy it. But if there's an option for them to have gotten it from a raid or gotten it from faction grinding, nobody's going to laugh at them for that. They put in their time, even if that time was just worth 20 bucks to them. Many of you may recall that I covered Sony's PR blunder from a few weeks back when they decided to start charging subscribers for their upcoming mini expansion to DC Universe Online called Fight for the Light. Well, I was not alone in my outrage over this particular choice, especially considering Sony's prior promises to not charge subscribers for future content. Well, I have a little bit of good news for anybody still following this subject. Sony's decided to go back on their decision to charge subscribers for this and is now offering Fight for the Light as a free expansion to DC Universe Online. But in my opinion, that's too little too late. I think the damage has already been done here. Not that Sony already had a sparkling reputation or anything in the MMO industry, but DC Universe actually had a chance to turn this around for them. They've made too many bad decisions. And despite going back on those decisions at a later time, the initial decision was already made. I think that the damage that has been done to the reputation of DC Universe Online over this whole fiasco can never really be repaired. However, Sony could go a long ways towards getting to that eventual goal if their future mini expansions of this type are all offered free, without having to tease us with charging us up front and then later offering it free, like it's some big favor to us. Additionally, with DC Universe's competitors in the superhero MMO genre, Champions Online and City of Heroes both going to a free-to-play model, I'm not seeing a very rosy future for DC Universe. And that's kind of a shame. There are many reasons that I wanted DC Universe Online to actually succeed, not the least of which is their very action-centric set of combat mechanics, which I think were quite innovative for the MMO genre and worked quite well. It really would be a shame to see an innovative set of mechanics such as that get buried by bad PR decisions on behalf of Sony. Before I sign off for the week, I'd like to do a quick update on the free-to-play conversions that will soon be happening with Fallen Earth and City of Heroes. First of all, we finally have a launch date for when Fallen Earth will be converting itself over to a free-to-play subscription model, and that will be coming on October 12th. In addition to this launch date, we also finally have the free-to-play matrix, which shows exactly what benefits will be offered to each tier of subscription. As you might have heard me talk about this previously on this show, there's actually 4 separate tiers, and based on the cursory glance of this matrix, they're actually doing a pretty good job of incentivizing most of these layers. Even the $10 a month one actually looks pretty darn good in my opinion. The only hang-up that I have with what they're currently offering is that the $30 subscription option really doesn't look all that much of the hotness. The primary benefit there being this aura that is offered to those players, wherein they can bestow similar benefits to about a $15 a month player on anybody that groups up with them. And while that does sound like it could be a very nice bonus to offer to anyone that wants to group with you, I think it kind of comes down to your social status as to whether or not that's actually going to be something worth buying into. And $30 a month seems like too much to pay for that. Now, as for City of Heroes, they're actually entering into their VIP head start for the free-to-play conversion by the time you've seen this episode on September 13th, and are already in there enjoying some of the new features that are coming with the launch of City of Heroes Freedom. However, they still don't have a solid launch date nailed down for when the Freepers will be allowed to join the rank and file of Paragon City's superheroes and supervillains, which actually leads me to believe that this head start is actually more of a beta, meaning that VIPs, that is people that are subscribing to City of Heroes, are paying for the privilege of participating in a beta. Ah, the benefits of spending your money. Wait. What? Well, that's all I have for this week's episode of The Morgue. Be sure to join me next week where I will finally be doing a review of Age of Conan Unchained, their own version of a free-to-play conversion, as well as any other newsy or editorial tidbits that I can rip out of the world of MMO goodness. So until then, everybody, play smart. And if you can't play smart, play dirty. I wear Game of Thrones t-shirts now. Game of Thrones t-shirts are cool. Soon to be converting to a free-to-play. Nah, bleh. Don't like it. Do not like that. Didn't like that at all. Yeah! Yeah!
Play dirty.